In 1907, a fire swept through the building, inflicting £3,000 worth of damage. The old corn store was gutted. The firefighting force was led by Jim Sherry, who was sleeping on the premises. His elder brother Frank stopped the fire from spreading to the mill by having the roof and the stairs which connected it to the corn store removed. As her workers fought to contain the fire, the Reverend Mother, with the older women, prayed in the chapel through the night. In 1908, with expansion and development, a great new boiler had to be imported and installed. It arrived at the local station and was dragged by horses and men to the bridge, where the County Council engineers refused it passage because of possible damage to the arches. But while the community slept, a column of daring irregulars dragged it across.
Hey, come on.
In the morning, when accused of breaking the law, they offered to drag it back again, an offer which was understandably declined. Anyway, the boiler was installed and in due course converted to oil and serves to this day. That's the colourful story of its history that still goes the rounds, true or false.
What do you mean by that? It happened all right. I was there.
The tall chimney that still dominates the Foxford landscape was built without scaffolding by two men working from the inside. And the factory hooter, or the buzzer as it's affectionately known here, became the community's most reliable timepiece, as it sent out its message over the workers' houses, starting, ending, and otherwise punctuating their day. The Great War brought boom years to the factory, especially with the demand for army blankets. Production rose steadily as the mills hummed through the night to fill the orders. In 1915, even more powerful turbines were installed. Now the mill could make its surplus electricity available to the houses of managers and other favoured buildings in the town. Workers on the evening shift were puzzled that the managers could tell them next morning the precise moment at which they had knocked off work the night before. As they left, they had to switch from dynamo to battery, sending a telltale flicker through the managers' houses. In 1921, the great mill clock, with its 4 enamel dials, was set up alongside the chimney. which had been erected in 1908, adding another useful landmark to the region. In the War of Independence, the factory suffered some harassment from the military. Frank Cherry's house was raided by the auxiliaries. The community's St. Patrick's Day feis was disrupted by the Black and Tans looking for the Irish language adjudicator. In May 1921, some of the mill hands were seized by the Black and Tans, stripped naked, painted red, white and blue, and thrown in the Moy. The outrage of Mother Murragh Bernard brought apologies and compensation from the authorities. The mill struggled gamely through these turbulent years, threatened on the other economic front by the slump in markets after the Great War. But the mills remained on full-time production all through the 1920s, where others went on part-time or closed down. Then, in April 1932, Mother Arsenius Murragh Bernard died at the age of 91, 36 years after the death of John Charles Smith, who had been such an inspiration to her remarkable life and achievement. The crowds at her funeral were testimony enough to her great service to the community and to the nation. Throughout her life, she had worked for the beatification of her order's founder, Mother Mary Aikenhead. As her funeral moved towards the nuns' plot in the parish churchyard, it would have been hard to judge which of the two was the greater saint. Certain clues to her character stand out on the record. She searched the books weekly for workers whose wages had been cut for lack of productivity. If it turned out that the fault lay in a defective machine, she reversed the decision. Then there was the incident when some of her employees had jeered at a local priest during the Parnell disturbances. The priest, with the backing of his bishop, had called for their dismissal. She had refused. Eventually, she undertook herself to apologize on their behalf at the church door. Thus, the matter was settled. When she was offered a machine to do the work of fringing, which might have replaced the elderly workers whose especial task it was, she replied, "That is not our way. We give employment to the people that will bring happiness to their lives." Her monuments were the factory with its tall chimney and clock, the schools nestling into the landscape by the riverbank. Then there was the sound of the buzzer, and the sight of workers coming and going between the mills and the neat rows of houses, one called Aikenhead Terrace, which she had brought into being. If she could have looked further ahead, she would have been pleased at the sight of sturdy youngsters no longer doomed to emigrate, and the delight of a community spirit that turned Foxford into an Andalusian village on the feast of Corpus Christi. And in the ongoing success of the music school she had founded in 1923. The power of nature manifested in the river's force had always been aligned with a higher power, constantly acknowledged in the life of the factory. When the factory became unionized in the 40s, the visiting union officials used to remark to the managing director, Seamus Cherry, on the contrast between Foxford, which sported religious images, and the generality of factories whose walls were festooned with pin-ups of film stars. And that was the sort of inspiration that Evelyn Duggan remembers from the years when, as a young girl, she worked with Mother Murrell Barnard.
She was a very blessed woman in the fact that, as I said, she came into the world, in my opinion, as a highly developed spiritual person. And of course, she had all these qualities that love gives. The love of God would reach out to the love of humanity. And so the idea would be to help whoever she came in contact with. So when she came to Foxford, she had all this love to give, and in this love, it encompassed the cultural life. She had a power to energize people and to take people who were absolutely unskilled and had no way of making a living and train them in very intricate work that there was in production, and there was a great perfection in every part of the work that came out of the mill, and it all came from her soul, her expectations of what the right thing would be, regardless of what. There were no difficulties in her life. It was like as if the idea came into her head and the doors just opened. Now, it wasn't as easy as that, but to her, it had never entered her head that there would be any obstacles that she couldn't overcome, because she knew that she had this union with God, I'd say, and that in that way it was God and herself working out this project. And it was quite an experience. I know that Dan O'Neill and Catherine Macaulay were the same type of women, and she was able to get all levels of people to help her. They enjoyed helping her because they knew that they were helping out in this area at the time, you know. And when a person that I've reached in my reading and so on reaches that stage, actually it isn't as hard as it seems. There are no obstacles.
The rhythm of the town beats to the business of arrival and departure, loading and unloading, as the raw wool comes in from the hinterland to the busy railway station, moves through the town towards the mill, to be sent out again in a myriad of new designs, colours and shapes all over the world. In 1934, the order books show a lively commerce with places as distant as India and Shanghai. The years of the Second World War brought fuel shortages, but did not deter the mills from celebrating their golden jubilee with harp and piano, dance and song. The local poets were never altogether idle in extolling the delights of town, landscape, and industry. How sweet it is thus to behold old Foxford by the winding Moy, when summer's charms there unfold, and lark exquisite sings on high. When tinted blue and shades of gold new spreads above the sunny sky, and flowery gems bring tales untold of beauty by the winding Moy. The mill race here is grand to view, the mad falls rushing, foaming by, Niagara Falls they bring to mind, when rolling past with moan and sigh. But there was a new threat in the early 1960s to the Moy and its environment, this time by a native government. The Board of Works, as it was then called, brought to County Mayo its ambitious but controversial scheme of arterial drainage. Whatever its merits for the farming community, the deepening of the river meant the end of the mill's water power as the river level dropped below the reach of the turbines. Its shadow remained engraved on the factory wall as the works turned over to electricity. Above the mill race, Within view of the inspirational colours of field, mountain and river, the work of the designer continues. Ivor Zors from Latvia has worked at the mills for 30 years, mixing the hues and tones, interweaving the texture and colours of 100 threads, constantly renewing the flair and variety of the Foxford product. He works the design of each season's new fabrics, preparing the swatches which will be taken by the sales force to the fashion centres of Ireland, continental Europe and beyond. And brought back to be further refined to the needs of an industry which is as exacting as it is whimsical. The 60s brought free trade, and the factory had to struggle for survival, not just against its multinational rivals, but against new trends in fabrics. Duvets replacing blankets, sophisticated man-made fibres displacing much of the traditional wools and tweeds. The mill diversified, not always successfully, but it held its own through the 70s and into the early 80s. Trade began to falter. Production and sales became more hesitant. Its looms and spools continued to turn, but more haltingly, as the end came in sight. Uncertainty and gloom invaded the cheerful workshops and warehouses. In August 1987, receivers were appointed with instructions to keep it open as a going concern, awaiting new ownership. But the unthinkable happened a mere 4 years before it had reached its century. It was a moment of real desolation when the buzzer sounded for the last time to end the working day in August 1988. Memories of a golden age continued to stir from the walls. Images of rural life, of pastoral innocence, and of industrial enterprise. But the eye of Providence had not closed on Foxford Mills. In October 1988, the factory would reopen with a new manager, a local man, one of the team of accountants, as Providence would have it, who had come in to wind up its affairs. A reduced but now expanding workforce began to operate the loom, warping, weaving, wefting, fringing, raising, burling, all the mysterious operations of a great traditional industry. Among its allies are the Sherry brothers, now retired, each of whom has given a lifetime of service to the mills, and whose uncle, Frank Sherry, had come from Caledon to Foxford over 100 years ago.
On the ones inside, yes.
Down the loft. Yeah.
This was, well, of course, the carding machine was here.
Carding machine.
And the mule then was the far side.
The mule was the far side.
And at the back then was the big number 4, the split one. The split one.
The split one. Yeah.
And what of Caledon itself, where John Charles Smith's factory once hummed with energy? John Charles Smith's grandson, Mr. Lawson, also from County Tyrone, an honoured guest, visits Foxford, where the memory of his great ancestor is preserved and revered at the convent of the Sisters of Charity.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lawson. You're welcome to Foxford.
I was just down visiting the mills and called over to say hello to you at the convent and see if my grandfather...
In how many convents, one wonders, is there a picture of a Protestant and Freemason so energetically displayed to commemorate so unique a friendship?
Every year.
And I'm sure you're happy to see that he's remembered here still with a photograph after the 100-year link.
Well, yes, it's wonderful, yes.
The plod of hooves, the creak of carts, the smell of raw wool, the hum of turbines in Moy water have now departed, giving way to new patterns of management and development. The drills we see here are not really instruments of demolition. They are agents of renewal, taking the factory into its new age. And these liberated young women, like the woman who founded the mill 100 years ago, are preparing for new enterprises where Foxford will share its present and its past with a wider audience through its factory, shop, art gallery, and the audiovisual pageant of its history.
And on that afternoon, the 6th of June, a beautiful boy, Mary driven to there, little else, an old pawn store in the little Bruce ground.
Even as far back as the days of those first farmers, sheep were raised here in the west of Ireland. Almost certainly, they were kept more for their warm, woolly skins than for eating, though no trace of clothing from that time remains. Warm clothing must have been badly needed as the climate grew colder, and the dark armies of clouds marched in from the Atlantic, spilling rain upon the softened.
Foxford Mills faced the new century, a living monument to that strange and wonderful partnership of a Tyrone Freemason and a Sister of Charity from County Cork.